So I've been wondering how Agile and Scrum in particular, because I'm a professional Scrum trainer for like 12 years now. So I was wondering how Scrum is actually used in the field. How many teams actually do Scrum? And I had some insight into that by asking people who come to my trainings or as a consultant, but I always wanted to get out of that bubble because I was sure that this is some kind of a bubble. So I ran a research, and probably some of you even participated. And I promised that I will share the results back with the community, and that's what I'm doing. So without further ado, let's start with the data. And by the way, this talk will be quite boring because I will be presenting lots of data. And you will have to think of conclusions and what that means. So I had 209 people respond to my survey. Now, the first question was, do you work on a Scrum team? And there were three options. Yes, that's 62% of those who participated. No, those are probably 12%. People who answered no, they just answered demographical questions, and that was the end of it. And there was the middle answer. Our team uses some elements of Scrum. And then they answered a lot of questions about how their Scrum is being done. Survey started on May 17th. That's the first response I have. And it's ongoing. You can still go to the site and respond, and I encourage you to do so. Respondents by role, unsurprisingly, mostly Scrum Masters. Surprisingly, just a few Agile coaches, very few Agile coaches. And I'm very glad that I reached quite a few developers. I hope to reach more developers, because actually Scrum is not for Scrum Masters, it's primarily for developers. So I kind of hoped that I can reach more developers, but I didn't. I started by saying that this is state of Scrum in Poland, because the survey was run in Polish so far. English version became available today, so I hope to gather some information from other countries, other geographies. Okay, so people were asked to self-assess their Scrum. And those who worked on Scrum team, they said, yes, I do work on a Scrum team. They assessed their Scrum on average at 3.5 on a 5-point scale. 5 meaning it's 100% Scrum as described in the Scrum Guide. And another question they answered was, okay, how useful that Scrum is in their circumstances. And 5 means it matches them perfectly, and 1 mean, well, doesn't. And interestingly, you can see that the average answer was closer to 5 than on the previous question. So we don't do Scrum that well in our own judgment, but we think it's quite useful. And you can also see how that relates. So people who think that their Scrum is useful, the majority think that Scrum is useful, and they also self-assess it as between 3 and a 4, right? You have to take those results, obviously, with a grain of salt, which means this is self-assessment. That's the key problem of running a research on a large scale, because you cannot actually go into all those 200 companies, or actually 193 that answered, yes, we have Scrum, or yes, we have elements of Scrum. You cannot go there and actually do a proper assessment of how good that Scrum is. You have to base it on their own self-assessment. But still, this is some results. So I tried to, by hopefully clever arrangement of questions, I was trying to elicit some data about whether this Scrum is actually Scrum or not. So here is the table. So we had 130 participants who declared, yes, we have a Scrum team. Okay. And those are the numbers you have seen already, self-assessment and usefulness, and what that means, what the scale is. So the first thing that I asked was, okay, do you have a definition of done? And turns out 90% of Scrum teams do have a definition of done. Wow, that's great. That's absolutely great. But the next question is, do you actually use it? And it was so structured that first I'm asking, do you have a definition of done? And there are 3 options. No, yes, we have it written down, or yes, but we don't have it written down. Now, if you say you don't have it written down, in my eyes, you don't have it. So it's already a no. But the next question is, okay, do you keep it? Unless you answered no, obviously. If you don't have it, no point asking. And there were again 3 options. Yes, we do. No, we don't. And third option was to some extent. But for me, to some extent equals no, right? So it turns out roughly half of the teams don't actually keep their definition of done. So it's like a dead document, doesn't do anything, it just sits there. So that's not very good. It's not very good. Okay, next thing. How do we come up with a sprint goal? And there was a number of questions, options, sorry. But the correct way per Scrum Guide, this is our benchmark, is that we discuss and create it on the sprint planning. And I would say most teams, out of those that we kind of selected in previous step, do this. Next step, how long is your daily? And most teams actually keep the 15-minute time box. And the next step is, do you do retrospectives? And again, most teams do, of those that do all the other stuff before. And the final question was, okay, who is on the daily meeting? And here, most people answered that the whole team is there. Now, per Scrum Guide, that's kind of incorrect, but I proposedly put it at the end of this table because I think it's actually beneficial. I don't see why removing product owner from that meeting would be hurting the team, with the exception of some exceptional product owners that you cannot really talk with, etc. But normally, I don't see anything bad with it. So if we stop here, I would say that roughly 1/3 of Scrum teams that actually say we are Scrum teams are actually doing Scrum. One word of caution, don't understand that this way that the teams that don't do Scrums are bad teams necessarily, or the other way around. We just ask about some things that are written in a document and whether they are kept in reality or not. It doesn't say us anything, it doesn't tell us anything about whether that's beneficial or not, right? Here we have only this self-assessment number about usefulness. But we have to take that one with grain of salt as well, because as we know, most respondents were Scrum Masters and they have a vested interest and they have to believe Scrum is beneficial to actually do their job. So with all those caveats, here are the numbers. Now let's focus on the definition of done, because I think it's one of the most important things that Scrum brings. This concept that you have to know what the state of your product is, and it's called done. And most Scrum teams, the higher number is all respondents. The number at the bottom is those who declared, percentage of those who declared they have Scrum, they are doing Scrum. 90% of them actually have a definition of done, but only 62% actually applied. So I would say 37% think they have a definition of done, but in actuality they don't. So there is lots of room for improvement. Now, since I had this middle option to some extent, there was an open question. Okay, what do you mean by that? And people were responding to that, and I found that very interesting. So those are the questions. Yeah? What do you mean by to some extent? I very much like the response, sometimes we bend reality. Or client get what they can afford. So we deliver something that is not done because the client cannot afford done. Okay. Another set of responses. Now I underline the ones that are coming from the Scrum Masters, because those are worrying. It is written down, but no one looks there and says a Scrum Master. It's actually your job to ensure they do. So, quality depends on stakeholders submitting the PBIs. Interesting. So I highlighted with this Scrum Master persona because I think they should have done something about it. You may note that I'm not reading all the responses. You can do it yourself. There was another question that was aimed at people who answered, yes, we do, yes, we keep it. Okay, how do you achieve that? and this is an interesting set of responses again. They have checklists, they have checks in Jira, but basically they consciously check it. And it seems kind of obvious, but still half of the teams don't do it. Next important practice, retrospectives. And here the picture is much, much better. Most teams do retrospectives. Most consider them useful, And there were just 4 responses to the question, why don't you use them? Because there was the option, no, we don't have them. And yeah, there is no time for this. That one I love. Or we are not expected to have them. It's kind of, it's not permitted, so we don't have them. Okay. Yeah. Another thing, unsurprisingly, most retrospectives are facilitated by the Scrum Master. I very much like that at least 16% of teams have it as a rotating duty. So every retrospective or every other retrospective is run by someone else on the team. I very much like that. I kind of feel sorry that it's just 16% of teams doing that. But I understand that since Scrum Master ceased to be an accountability on the team as the Scrum Guide defines it and became a profession, then that's something Scrum Masters feel they have to do and don't want to release. That's my hypothesis, obviously. I have no idea why it's so. I'm just presenting a number. This was my thought on it. Finally, this practice called the backlog refinement. Again, positive image. Most teams do it. Very few don't do it or do it at the last moment on the sprint planning. So that's kind of a positive image, at least in my view. Now, there was this question, why do you use Scrum? And it was an open question, so people were writing different things. And I want to present it by the self-assessment that they decided on earlier. So the one was, our Scrum is a complete strategy. And why do you use Scrum then? That's what our auditors want. Okay. 2, it's slightly better. I have no idea where it came from. Was decided before I joined. That came up quite a lot. So it's just there. It's just what it is. I just do it. The way it is was set up ages ago. Someone put it into the contract that we are agile, in quotes. Okay. But interestingly, there was a response that caught my attention. Because we develop an enterprise-class product in an environment full of dependencies, and that's actually a very good reason to use something empirical like Scrum. However, they do it badly, in their own judgment. In their own judgment, it's a 2. Now let's move on to the 3, and the 3 being the average. And it is this middle ground on a 5-point scale. There was a lot of responses here. And the most common was decided by the higher-ups. Someone higher up in the hierarchy said, everyone now do Scrum, and so we do it. And we do it, well, not very well, but not very bad. There were some good answers here. There was one answer that caught my attention, which was, we are not aware of anything better. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe you can invent something, or I don't know. It's better than nothing. that was also. Yeah, I would agree with that any kind of order is better than chaos. So yeah, it's probably true. Because we want to. That was another answer. We like this style and the clients support it too. You like it, but you don't do it very well. But again, maybe they do it well, but they just see a huge room for improvement. Finally, 4. Here we have, again, was decided by the higher-ups. And you can see that there are some different answers emerging, right? Like team so decided, or we kept on improving our processes, and it turned out we ended up with Scrum. So kind of self-evolved in the organization. And finally, the 5s, people who said their Scrum is very good. And here we have just one answer that it was imposed from above, and the other answers, there was fewer answers of this type, but nevertheless, the answers were more about why we use it, because it's good, because team likes it. There were more than one answer of this type. I kind of compressed them a bit. Another thing, what other practices do you use on a team? And unsurprisingly, Kanban is very popular. What I was surprised, though, is that pair programming is used by half of the Scrum teams. That's interesting. That's very good, actually. What is not so good that only about 1/4 of teams practice TDD. Well, we did a workshop yesterday on TDD, why it's useful, why it's a design tool rather than a testing tool. Okay, so that was about Scrum, but I actually collected some other interesting information that I want to share with you, other interesting data. And I will present the data, but on the top of the slide, you will see my interpretation. So the first thing that kind of surprised me, half surprised me, because I was expecting something like that, but I didn't expect it to be so radical, is that office work is a thing of the past. Only 1% of respondents, and those are everybody who did the survey, only 3 people work in the office, and everyone else works remotely to some extent. Now, we'll see whether that changes, but that's the image now. I was a bit surprised by this. Okay, I don't have time to go into why I think it is so, but still, that's the picture, and I think we have to take that into account and adapt to it. Another interesting thing is that the 2-week sprints are the norm by far. I don't expect that to change as I gather more data. 2-week sprints are the standard everywhere. Finally, SAFe seems to be winning the market. That's bad news. That's really bad news. Now, the number of responses here from which this data is gathered is just 63. Why? Because A, I came up with the idea of including that in the research after a dozen answers already were collected. But second, I first asked, do you have a scaling method in your organization? There are 3 answers, yes, no, or I don't know. And only those who responded yes are asked, okay, what it is, right? Still, SAFe came out first, and I'm kind of appalled by this. What I like, but there was an option. We have our own method that we evolved. And again, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but generally I like the idea that organizations evolve their own methods. So that's good that this is second. I feel sorry that Les got only 11% of votes. I would have hoped that it would be the other way around, but it is what it is. And sources of knowledge about Scrum, unsurprisingly, Scrum Guide. By the way, the percentages obviously are above, if you assume them, they're above 100% because you could select more. But what I love about it is that people still read books. That's good. That's good. Most people still read books, and that's good. So it makes sense to write them. What I was kind of sad about is that only 18% indicated that our Scrum Master is a source of information about Scrum, because actually the idea was the other way around. Okay, so that's practically all that I have for now. There is a bit more, but I would have to spend much more time on this stage talking about it. So I will be publishing like a report very soon. Thanks to people who helped me spread the word. But I keep on collecting answers, and as I said, now you can do the survey in both Polish and English, and I hope to get some data from outside Poland as well. If you only can, scan the code, participate in the survey, give me some more data that I can then share back with you. And that's all I have for you today.
Thanks, Andy. Couple of questions. Some people are somehow curious about your research. So the first one. What do you mean by using DoD? Is it team having a written checklist for each PBI, or can this be more informal?
I mean, okay, I lost my. Okay, I mean by that actually, whatever makes it into the increment conforms to the definition of done as you have established it. So that's, I think, a very simple answer.
Did you ask them about doing Scrum at the end after all detailed questions? The answer can differ from previous one.
That was the first question, and the reason for that was I wanted to know their first-hand self-assessment first. So that's what they think about themselves, and only then see how that plays out with different elements of the framework. And B, I didn't want to get the noise of the data from people who actually don't do Scrum and they will be trying to answer all the detailed questions. So people who answered, no, we don't, were not shown all those questions about DoD, retrospective, etc., because that makes sense in their context.
Thanks. And the last one, there are a couple of more, especially Carolina's, for example. If you want to ask Andy afterwards, he's here, there, probably. And the last one is, what do you think on using elements of Scrum to make Agile work in an organization where doing Scrum by the book isn't possible, hitting the wall?
I'm very much in favor of that. If you consciously do that and you say, okay, Scrum will not work here for whatever reason, but we find retrospectives and the definition of done. For example, beneficial, of course, why not? I mean, Scrum is not the only method. Is not the method for everything. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks.